Hello, let us continue our discussion on An Eastern Ballad by Allen Ginsberg. In my previous lecture, I have mentioned some of the basic informations regarding the concept of the beat poetry, and also some of the informations I have gathered from the Wikipedia section regarding Allen Ginsberg. Now let us think about the text itself. You will find that the primary concern, that the title of this particular poem is An Eastern Ballad. Therefore, fundamentally, the first thing that comes to our mind, that what is a ballad? You will find that somehow ballad is a form of the lyric poetry. It is called the dramatic lyric poetry to some extent. Now, what is very significant and very important, as you know, that in the form of a ballad, you can find some of the musical aspects being incorporated. And at the same time, the typical lucid temperament of this particular kind of a poem, it actually describes in a very lucid form what a person generally thinks about. Say, for example, now you are taking this particular poem, An Eastern Ballad. You will find that some Oriental significations has to be incorporated in this particular poem. That's the term Eastern is being mentioned in this poem. And at the same time, you will find that the poem is very lucid. The temperament is very focused, as you can see. So similarly, you will find that in Eastern Ballad, the descriptive notion of the poem actually indicates something very lucid. That's why there is the reference to the sea. That's why there is the reference to the moon. But at the same time, as I have already mentioned, that we are reading a beat poetry. So therefore, the significations of the beat poetry, the temperament of a beat poet has to be treated in this particular poem also. As I've said, that beats poetry evolved during the 1940s in both New York and on the West Coast. Poets like Allen Ginsberg, Gary Snyder, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and Gregory Corso questioned mainstream politics and culture. They later became known as the Beats generation. The Beats generation were poets who interested in changing consciousness and resisted conventional form of writing. The poem An Eastern Ballad by Allen Ginsberg is very different from that particular scenario. It shows that he is a very creative and can think deeply. He writes, I never dreamed the sea to be so deep, the earth so dark, so long my sleep, I become another child. I wait to see the world so go wild. It's something, an interesting part of this particular poem. It shows that Ginsberg has a childlike thought process when he is describing things. This is a reflection of the Beats movement because it makes you think deeper to get a different perspective. Now, what happens, you know, that in this particular poem, Ginsberg mentions the emotion of the moon, and its very essence he integrates. He also integrates imagery in the poem a lot. The first and second stanza correlates really well together because it talks about the moon and the sea, the moon which controls the sea, and the sea which is submissive to the moon. Now, Ginsberg points out the emotion of the moon and its very essence, as it has been pointed out by an eminent critic. She moves in thought, she cannot speak. But then, as we said, the disconnection with humanity is stated in the fourth line of this particular poem. To be able to protect emotion, to have color and personality, is to have experienced life in all its hardship. This is a poem that actually speaks out than all the rest. The correlation with the first and the second moves well in itself. The moon and then the sea. The moon which controls the sea, and the sea which is submissive to the moon. So let us think about the poem itself. As you can find in this particular poem, there are ample references of the theme of love, but in a different sense. As I have mentioned in my past lecture, in my past discussion, that somehow you can find here also that Ginsberg is describing to some extent the alternative portrayal of the society, the way the romantic writers and romantic thinkers think about the theme of love in a different way. And that somehow, as I mentioned in my previous lecture, that ultimately you will find that the typical Blakean temperament of the world of the innocence and world of experience has to be treated in this particular poem also. The theme of love in the concept of experience, innocence, and the theme of love in the concept of experience has to be different. because the society is gradually changing, because it is an era of disillusionment. So ultimately, you will find that power politics, materialistic observations, the earthly representations, and various kinds of political scenarios can have to be present within this particular society also. And likewise, you will find that the typical formation of love, it also got oriented in the formation of the ideological stimulation to love itself. Say, for example, in the first lines, or first two lines, we find he writes that I speak of love that comes to mind. Let's come to the poetry section. Here he writes that I speak of love that comes to mind. The moon is faithful, although blind. So ultimately, from the very beginning of this particular poem, he writes in the first person. That's why the I is being incorporated. The poet begins the particular poem with a description of love. He says, I speak of love that comes to mind. So ultimately, we'll find that is the poem is actually referring to or indicating towards the particular concept of love itself? Is he referring to the mental construction of love, or rather something different? The poet begins the poem by describing love, and he compares love to the moon. He says, I speak of love that comes to mind. The moon is faithful, although blind. She moves in thought, she cannot speak. Perfect care has made her bleak. So this is the first stanza of this particular poem. Here in the first two lines, it has been incorporated that there is an old English proverb, as you see, the love is blind. And as you can see, that it is very common in the usages. However, in order to be willfully blind, one must have a kind of strong faith that can overcome the evidence that is presented before eyes. Thus, in order to truly love somebody, one must live by faith and not vision. However, such faith may vary, will be akin to a lack of hope on the object of faith. The blindness of love often renders a person unable to recognize, to understand the feelings or failings rather of his or her partner. So ultimately, you will find that somehow the poem actually begins with this particular form. Here, the moon is being incorporated as one of the lovers, and it has been pointed out that the moon is faithful and moon is also blind. Then it writes, she moves in thought, but she cannot speak. She can feel the basic essences of the relationships, but ultimately she cannot speak. Why? Because perfect care has made her bleak. So ultimately, whenever you are going through the first stanza of this particular poem, you will find that the poet is describing the moon in this particular poem. So ultimately, you will find that moon is blind, the moon is faithful, the moon is thoughtful, but it cannot speak, and it is scary. That's why it's perfect care that has been pointed out here. It has made her bleak. So all these incorporations, ultimately, the emotions have been projected here. And you will find that Ginsberg is describing that. So do you not feel that somehow whenever we will go through the particular stanza, that is the first stanza of this particular poem, we will gather some innocent orientations to love? Yes, it is true. But whenever you will go with the second stanza, you will find that the certain orientation has got changed in the second one. Okay, that means there you will find that how moon is to some extent disturbing the temperament of love itself. Rather, it is something different whenever you will think of the sea, because it is the controlling and controlled kind of orientation has to be incorporated. Here it is being written that she moves in thought, she cannot speak, perfect care has made her bleak. What does it incorporate? You will find that here the poet portrays the moon as an individual with the ability to project emotion. It has been pointed out by some critics that as an individual who retains both color and personality, despite having been fraught with all hardships in life. The hardships, however, have lent an inhuman pragmatic quality to the moon, disconnecting her from humanity and turning her emotions bland. The pragmatism of the moon compels her to take utmost care at every step. Her actions are now guided more by the head than the heart. So there is a kind of a change you can perceive. This has turned her emotionless and bland. She is now devoid of either the power or the will to express her emotions, or maybe she has none left to express. So fundamentally, what you can trace in this particular form of writing, we can find that a certain kind of emotional and temperamental change, and the change in the aspect has been pointed out here. That means in spite of having emotions, in spite of having feelings, you cannot express your own self. Why? Because it is the society that actually makes you to feel in a different way. Because you know that whenever you will express your own emotion, whenever you will express your own feelings, it will certainly turn or can be turned against you. So that is the condition of the society. When you will find the most innocent kind of relationships can be turned against you, can be turned into some quote-unquote mature temperament. So from innocence to experience in the Blackian terms. Now, whenever you think of the last stanza of this particular poem, what it indicates? The poet writes, I never dreamed the sea so deep. So ultimately now you will find the incorporation has been made regarding the sea. What it says, I never dreamed the sea so deep, the earth so dark, so long, my sleep. So think about these two lines, line number 5 and line number 6. The poet now reflects on the inner qualities of the sea, as you can see here. And according to the poet, the sea has got deep inner feelings too, right? And at the same time, this particular feeling is for the moon. So it bears the typical form of dominion with a quiet sense of fortitude, as you can see. This brings out the typical complication associated with a kind of a love relationship. In a relationship, as you can see, that one particular partner plays the role of a dominant figure and another has to obey it, or rather you will find the recessive temperament has to be there. This leads to a kind of a degeneration of love into a petty act of power play or power politics. Fundamentally, you will find that the poem is actually indicating this particular consideration of power play. It's, as I mentioned, that the typical orientation of love, it has got changed as the poem progresses. At the very opening stanza, whenever you will find that Ginsberg is describing love in its truest term, in its innocent terms. But whenever the poet actually moves towards its aim, towards its progressed form, you will find the basic temperament of this particular poem certainly got changed. And ultimately, it is the society that actually implicates different kinds of orientations, whether it is the power politics, whether it is the materialistic adjustments, whether it is the compromises, or whether it is the exploitation and exploited orientation, or maybe the controller and the controlled orientations. So such kind of power politics, such kind of psychological play or psychological game is the primary focus that actually indicates the typical form of degeneration, the typical form of say failure in the formation of love itself. So that's why you will find that I never dreamed the sea so deep, but I can feel now that the typical depth, so far as the relationship is concerned, is there. The earth is so dark and so long, my sleep. Why the incorporation of the sleep is there? You will find that certainly this particular formation of sleep is oriented with the formation of ignorance. That means whenever you are in your innocent childhood, ultimately you are in sleep because you cannot perceive the society, perceive the conditions, perceive the situations in a proper form. So now you have been awakened by the society experience, and now you can see that what is happening in front of you. So that is the thing, that is the typical form of ironic representation of love and life, and at the same time the societal orientations that Allen Ginsberg is proposing here. Here it writes, the last two stanzas, or last two lines, sorry, these are significantly very important. It writes that I have become another child. Okay, why another child? Because now there is a kind of a shift. Because from ignorance to knowledge, from innocence to experience, Blackian innocence to Blackian experience. So now I have become another child because I could feel. I could feel the society, I could feel or I can feel now the typical orientation of the society, typical problem, politics, culture, etc., etc. As you can see, as you can feel. I wake, or rather read, I want to wake to see the world go wide. So that is the focus of this particular poem. That is the temperament of the Beats poetry. as I mentioned earlier, that they are against the age-old conventions that is going on, the particular kind of decadence, kind of degeneration that is prevailing within the society. The beat poets are always thinking about the alternative. The beats poets are always thinking about something in front of you, okay? Some radical movements, some radical changes are there, okay? You are just waiting for that. The typical temperament that you can find in Blake also, the typical temperament that you can find in Keats and Shelley also, right? You are thinking about the quote-unquote golden age of mankind. You are thinking about something better, something greater, and ultimately you will find that here it writes that I wake to see the world go wild. So this particular form of wild, this very term is signifying something better, something positive. The last two lines in this particular poem, it has a to some extent childlike quality. Why? Because here the being frustrated after watching such kind of relationship that is going on and that have been completely being degenerated into some power politics, as you can see. And he feels that he has lost himself. He became a new person, therefore. One who fed up with the world is devoid of the interest to carry on any further. He wishes to go to sleep and wake up in a new world, a changed world, however, where the people are governed by heart, where the people are governed by innocence. Okay? And it will be the world that would learn to get go of this dominance. It is a world where love reigns supreme, which would be free from the narrow fetters of domination. So fundamentally, whenever you will go with this particular poem, you will find that the formation of innocence, formation of experience, what is happening there, the power politics, the orientation to power politics, and a particular kind of a choice, a particular kind of a desire, it has been described at the end of this particular poem. So that is the thing, that is the fundamental poem. So you have to, whenever you will go with this particular poem, you need to know something about the power play that is going on there. It is, you can find that this particular poem is simply a kind of a love poem, or rather Allen Ginsberg is actually thinking about the typical kind of a criticism or quote-unquote love that is actually going on within the society. Is it a poem of social criticism? Is it something incorporating something for the society, betterment of the emotions, betterment of the human qualities? Okay, so all these things have to be taken in consideration, and also try to relate this particular poem with the Cambridge aesthetics that I have mentioned in my previous lecture, and also I have mentioned regarding this particular poem also. And the last thing that you should do, you just Google and try to identify and read the particular poem that is named as the Western Ballad. Okay, it is also another poem that is considered to be the twin poems of Allen Ginsberg. So up to this, stay attached. I hope this will help you in your examination. Thank you.